There have been video games that showed depictions of extreme violence and bloodshed well before Mortal Kombat ever really made that a thing. Back in the early 80s, there was an adaptation of Halloween on the Atari 2600, which did show a very pixelated, cartoony image of decapitation, which is kind of surprising for the Atari 2600 to say the least. Also, there was a game called Chiller, which was released in arcades, and an unlicensed version did come out to the NES, which had bodies and medieval torture, dismemberment, crushed heads, all kinds of stuff like that you were in control of. And then in 1988, a game called Splatterhouse came to the arcades in Japan, came here to the US another year after that, and about another year after that still, it found its way to the TurboGrafx 16. The game first came to my attention in the way of commercials for that TurboGrafx 16 version. Probably Saturday afternoons during wrestling, can't think of any other TV spot it would have appeared on, and it stood out to me to say the least. I didn't really get to find out what the game was all about until a little bit later, but this image of the 2x4 wielding masked protagonist, it did conjure images of Jason Voorhees. Splatterhouse is the tale of a young man named Rick who, along with his girlfriend Jennifer, were trapped inside a mansion of an evil mad scientist. Granted superhuman strength by an ancient artifact known as the Terror Mask, Rick battles hordes of monsters through the mansion, but his attempts to save his beloved Jennifer were all for naught, or so we're led to believe. And that's what leads us to the sequel, Splatterhouse 2, released on the Sega Mega Drive, known in the US as the Genesis, first appeared in 1992. It opens with Rick having dreams of the mask, telling him to come back and rescue Jennifer. The series as a whole takes inspiration from not just Friday the 13th, but a number of other horror films complete with graphic, gory violence. From the start of the game, you're slugging it out with monsters, smashing them with weapons, and yes, splattering their guts all over the walls. It's pretty apparent where the title comes from. Not unlike one of my favorite 80s horror films, Evil Dead 2, Splatterhouse 2 is kind of a sequel and a remake rolled into one. It takes everything the original game did and improves on it greatly, except for the gameplay, which may be very basic, possibly a little clunky, but still passable to say the least. You walk to the right, punching, kicking, and bashing a series of progressively more hideous monsters as you go along. The weapons you can obtain and use to your advantage include a shotgun and a chainsaw. Groovy. This was the first and only Splatterhouse title I ever played back in the 90s, and I do remember that I played it quite a bit, despite the fact that I never made it very far in the game. The game throws a lot at you, just as a proper horror-themed video game should. In order to show some variety in the gameplay footage, I'm getting my wish granted by the good old Game Genie, but it's also worth noting that the US and PAL versions of this game do feature a password system, which is quite convenient. The main draw to this game is its presentation. Right from the get-go, you find yourself punching enemies' torsos right off the rest of them and swinging that 2x4, setting them into the background wall, truly putting the splatter in Splatterhouse. The game definitely tries for a gross-out factor with the blood and guts that are spewed by the monsters. I guess it's okay since you're killing monsters and not people, but anyway, the overall visual design is very good with detailed sprites and everything is very colorful despite the dreary setting. The music is also a perfect match. Very creepy, but still fitting for an action game. Many of the songs are full of an eerie, nasal, simulated harpsichord sound, which the Genesis sound chip does so well. Probably the worst part of the presentation though, and more than anything else, the biggest negative about the game to me would be the sound effects. Muffled grunts, scratchy screams, and numerous other uninspired noises do no favors to the game. And in some parts, the monster screams can get pretty annoying too, but truth be told, on the Genesis, you can do a hell of a lot worse. In short, what you have here is a game that does show its age with clunky controls and mediocre sound effects, but it is such a product of its time. It's an example of the things that Sega would license to put out on the Genesis to make it stand out and give it that edgier attitude over its prime competitor Nintendo. And now it comes off kind of like the schlocky horror films that it's trying to emulate, but I think it's still pretty fun and worth a look. That original cartridge is climbing in price. It's somewhere around $50 right now if I'm not mistaken, but it was also released on the Wii Virtual Console, so you can check it out that way if you so choose. Hope you've enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.